I didn't say a word when I walked into the room. I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, watching my stepmother arrange herself in the chair across from me like she was the one doing me a favor by showing up. My father sat beside her. My stepsister Lena was next to him, picking at her nail polish like this was a waiting room at the DMV and not the office of an estate attorney. None of them looked at me directly. That told me everything. My name is Cassidy Vance. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA, which means for the last decade, I've spent my life making sure that numbers tell the truth, even when people don't want them to. I know how to read a balance sheet and find the line someone hoped you'd skip over. I know how to follow money backward through 3 years of transactions and find exactly where it went. That skill, the one my grandmother paid for, the one my family tried to take, is the same skill that saved me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My grandmother, Nana Ruth, died on a Tuesday in March. She was 82, sharp until the very end, and she smelled like lavender and Murphy's oil soap. She had worked as a bookkeeper for the same hardware store for 34 years, clipped coupons her entire adult life, and never once bought anything she considered a luxury. Was she considered a luxury? Avocados, brand-name trash bags, and greeting cards that cost more than $2. What she did not consider a luxury, her granddaughter's future. When my mother died, I was 9, ovarian cancer, 17 months from diagnosis to funeral. Nana Ruth stepped in before my father had even figured out how to buy groceries. She drove 40 minutes each way to pick me up from school 3 days a week. She taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 12 because, she said, a woman who understands money is a woman no one can fool. She meant it. She lived it. She saved. When I got into the University of Virginia, she cried. Not the delicate kind of crying either. She sat at her kitchen table with a dish towel pressed to her face and her shoulders shaking, and when she came up for air, she said, Ruth Vance's granddaughter is going to UVA. Lord have mercy. She had an account she called Cassidy's Future. She'd been putting money into it since I was born. By the time I graduated high school, there was $47,000 in it. She paid my first 2 years of college directly from that account. Then she got sick. Not critically. Not then. Just old person sick. The kind that requires a home health aide 3 mornings a week and a new medication every 6 months. She told me she needed to slow down on the withdrawals. I told her it was fine. I got loans for my junior and senior year and worked 20 hours a week at a tax preparation office, which is where I discovered that I was, in fact, very good at this. What I didn't know. What she didn't tell me until I was 26 and sitting at her kitchen table while she still had enough clarity to be deliberate about it was that she'd replenished the account. I put it back, she said, sliding a piece of paper across the table. It was a printout from her bank. The balance read $61,400. And then some. I want you to have it when I go. Not your father. Not that woman he married. You. We went to her attorney that same week. She had a will already, updated after my mother died. She added a TOWD transfer on death designation to that account, naming me as sole beneficiary. She signed it. The attorney notarized it. She handed me a copy and said, put that somewhere safe. I put it in my fireproof safe at home. I also scanned it and uploaded it to a password-protected folder in cloud storage. I am, as I mentioned, a CPA. I understand documentation. My stepmother did not know any of this. Neither did my father. My father remarried when I was 14. Her name is Renata, and she arrived in our lives with 2 suitcases, a diffuser, and an opinion about everything. She's not a cruel person in the dramatic sense. She doesn't yell. She doesn't throw things. What she does is redirect. She redirects attention, redirects money, redirects the narrative of any given situation until she is somehow at the center of it, put upon and deserving of sympathy. Her daughter Lena was 12 when they moved in. Lena grew up understanding, on some cellular level, that there was a finite amount of resources in our house, attention, praise, money, and that the best strategy was to want more of it than she needed and never stop asking. I left for college at 18 and didn't fully exhale until I crossed the Virginia state line. I came home for holidays. I watched my father become someone I recognized less each year. Not brainwashed, not stupid, just tired and conflict-averse in the way that some men become when they've chosen peace over truth for long enough that they can no longer find the difference. He loves Renata. I believe that. I also believe that love, for him, became synonymous with agreement. By the time Nana Ruth died, Lena was 28, and in the middle of a financial crisis she had entirely created for herself. She had quit her 3rd job in 2 years, was behind on her car payments, and had just broken up with the boyfriend who had been covering half her rent. She needed money. A lot of it. And apparently, my family had decided where it was going to come from. I found out 3 weeks after the funeral, My father called me on a Sunday evening and asked if I was free to talk. I said yes. He started with small things, how I was doing, how the drive back to Richmond had been, whether I was eating. I knew from the preamble that whatever came next was going to be significant. My father does not ask about my eating habits unless he is building towards something. He told me that Renata and Lena had been talking, that Lena was in a difficult spot, that they were worried about her. Then he said, very carefully, that Nana Ruth's savings account, he called it Mom's account, might be something the family could discuss together. I asked him what he meant by discuss. He said he meant figure out what was fair. I asked him if he knew about the toady designation. There was a pause. Then he said he knew Nana Ruth had set some things aside for me, but that he didn't think she'd understood the full picture of what Lena was going through, and that if she had, she might have felt differently. I want to be clear about what he was actually saying. He was saying that my grandmother's explicit, notarized, legally documented wishes should be reconsidered because his stepdaughter needed money. I said I would think about it. I hung up and sat very still for a long time. Then I called my own attorney. Her name is Deborah Finch, and she has been practicing estate law in Richmond for 22 years. She has a way of speaking that is very calm and very precise, like she is explaining something to you in real time and also slightly disappointed that it needs explaining. I described the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, the Todd designation is ironclad. The account transferred to you automatically upon your grandmother's death. It's not part of the estate. It's not subject to any claims from family members. I already knew this. I had looked it up the night before. But hearing her say it helped. She also told me something I hadn't considered, that if my father or stepmother had already made any moves on that account, any calls to the bank, any paperwork filed under my grandmother's name, that could constitute fraud. I thanked her and asked her to stay available. I did not call my father back. What I did instead was quiet and methodical. I contacted the bank directly and put a flag on the account. I verified that the transfer had already cleared. The money was in my name, in my account, had been since the day after Nana Ruth died. The bank representative confirmed that no third party had contacted them about the account. Then I waited. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from an attorney I had never heard of. Not Nana Ruth's attorney. A different one based in Northern Virginia with Renata's return address on the envelope. The letter informed me that my father and stepmother were seeking clarification regarding the distribution of Ruth Vance's assets and requested that I contact their representative at my earliest convenience. I read it twice. I set it on my kitchen counter. I took a photograph of it. Then I called Deborah. Here's what I learned over the following 3 weeks. As Deborah started pulling on threads, Renata had called Nana Ruth's bank 6 days after the funeral. She had identified herself as the daughter-in-law and asked about any accounts associated with Ruth Vance. The bank, correctly, had told her they could not release account information to non-authorized parties. She had then filed a request with the probate court to have the estate, all of it, reviewed for proper distribution, on the grounds that Ruth Vance had been experiencing cognitive decline at the time of her recent financial decisions. Cognitive decline. My grandmother, who 2 weeks before she died had beaten me at Scrabble by 43 points and then lectured me for 10 minutes about the proper use of the word chi. The claim was nonsense, but it was filed, which meant it had to be answered. I could have called my father and screamed. I thought about it. I thought about it seriously, standing in my kitchen at 11 o'clock at night with a glass of wine going warm in my hand. I wanted to. There is a version of this story where I do, and it probably feels good for about 90 seconds. I didn't. I made a spreadsheet instead. See, here's the thing about being a CPA. You understand that every transaction leaves a trace. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every conversation that touches money eventually produces documentation somewhere. And I had been my grandmother's unofficial financial helper for the last 4 years of her life, helping her read her statements, flag anything that looked off, understand her Medicare paperwork. In that time, I had seen things. Not criminal things. Not at first. Just patterns. Money moving from Nana Ruth's checking account to an external account I didn't recognize. Small amounts initially, 200 here, 300 there. I had asked her about it once. She had waved her hand and said my father had needed help with some car repairs. I let it go. I did not delete the screenshots I had taken. I pulled them out now. 4 years of screenshots. I looked at the external account number and cross-referenced it with the Venmo and Zelle records I had from my father's shared family account, which I still had access to from a joint expense account we maintained during one optimistic period when we were trying to split the cost of Nana Ruth's home health aid. The money had not gone to car repairs. It had gone, over a period of 38 months, in increments of $200 to $800, to an account I could now confirm based on the Zelle username, which was not subtle, belonged to Lena. Total, approximately $22,000, transferred from my grandmother's checking account to my father's account and then to Lena, while my grandmother believed she was helping with family expenses. I sat with that number for a long time. Then I picked up the phone and called Deborah. She was quiet when I finished explaining. The kind of quiet that is not empty. "You have documentation of all of this?" she asked. "Spreadsheets, screenshots, Zelle records, and a 4-year transaction log," I said. Another pause. "Cassidy," she said. "This is elder financial abuse." I knew that too. I had known it since about 2 in the morning, when the shape of what I was looking at had fully assembled itself. I had just needed to hear someone else say it. We spent the next hour talking through options. I could report it to Adult Protective Services. I could file a civil suit. I could go to the district attorney's office. The $22,000 had come from accounts that predated the Title D designation, so whether it could be recovered was a question for litigation. But what was clear was that my stepmother's attempt to challenge Nana Ruth's final financial decisions, the ones made in full cognitive health in front of a notary, was happening against a backdrop of a years-long pattern of taking money from an elderly woman who didn't know it was happening. "They filed the probate challenge," Deborah said. "We respond. And when we respond, we include everything you found." "Will that end it?" I asked. "I think," she said carefully, "that when they understand what the response contains, they'll withdraw the challenge voluntarily." She was right, but first, there was a meeting. My father called me 2 days after Deborah filed our preliminary response. He asked if we could all sit down together. Him, Renata, Lena, me, before this went any further. He used that phrase 3 times. "Before this goes any further." I said yes. I suggested we use a neutral location. He suggested the family home. I suggested we use a conference room at Deborah's office instead. He agreed, which surprised me. I think he thought it would be him and Renata walking in with their attorney and walking out with a compromise. I got there early. I always get there early. They came in together, my father, Renata, Lena, and their attorney, whose name I have already forgotten and have no interest in remembering. Renata was wearing the expression she always wears in difficult situations, which is a kind of preemptive weariness, as if the hardship of this moment is already established fact. Lena sat down without making eye contact. My father looked at me like he was hoping I would give him a way out that didn't require him to have known what was happening. I looked at all 3 of them and I thought, they still think this is a negotiation. Deborah set a folder on the table. Their attorney opened with a long, careful statement about family harmony and the complexity of grief and the desire for equitable resolution. Deborah listened without blinking. When he finished, she said, "I appreciate that framing. I'd like to respond by sharing some documentation we've compiled." She opened the folder. She walked them through it in order. The TOD designation, the notarization date, the bank confirmation that the transfer had been completed lawfully. Then she moved to the second section, the transaction records, the spreadsheet, the 4 years of transfers, the Zelle records. She placed a single sheet of paper in front of their attorney. This represents approximately $22,000 transferred from Ruth Vance's accounts to her son's account and subsequently to a third party, over a period of 38 months. Ms. Vance was 78 to 81 years old during this period. She was not informed of the purpose of these transfers, as confirmed by statements she made to my client. Lena stopped picking at her nail polish. Renata's expression did not change. She had the particular skill of people who are very good at not reacting, which only works until the thing being presented is bad enough. Their attorney asked for a moment to confer with his clients. Deborah said, "Of course." My father looked at me then, really looked at me, and I looked back, and I thought about Nana Ruth at her kitchen table with a dish towel pressed to her face and her shoulders shaking. I thought about the phrase, "A woman who understands money is a woman no one can fool." I thought about the copy of the toddy paperwork sitting in my fireproof safe, and the scan in the cloud, and the 4 years of screenshots I had not deleted. I had not set out to catch them. I want to be clear about that. I had set out to protect myself. The catching was just what happened when I started paying attention. Their attorney came back. He said his clients would be withdrawing the probate challenge. Deborah said she appreciated that and noted that we reserved all rights to pursue further action related to the transaction records she had shared. He said his clients understood. We all stood up. Nobody shook hands. In the parking lot, my father caught up to me before I reached my car. I turned around. He looked older than he had an hour ago. That is not a metaphor. It is a literal thing that happens to people when a version of themselves they've been maintaining finally gives way. He said, she didn't know where the money was going. I looked at him. What did you think was happening? He said he thought Nana Ruth knew. He thought it was her idea. He said Renata had told him she'd talked to her, that they'd worked it out. I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if it matters. What I know is that for 38 months, money left my grandmother's account and went to his stepdaughter, and he asked no questions about the mechanism because the result was convenient. I said, she kept a list, Dad, a handwritten list of every time she transferred you money. She wrote it in her planner. She thought it was for emergencies. She kept track because she loved you and she didn't want you to be embarrassed about needing help. He didn't say anything. She had $22,000 less than she could have had, and she never once mentioned it to me because she didn't want me to think less of you. I got in my car. I drove home. I did not cry until I was on I-95, and then I cried for about 20 minutes, and then I was done. That was 14 months ago. The probate challenge was withdrawn. The $61,400 remained in my account. Deborah filed a civil complaint regarding the transaction records. 6 months later, my father and Renata settled for $18,500, which went into a charitable account I set up in Nana Ruth's name at the University of Virginia. It funds a small annual scholarship for first-generation students in the business school. I have not spoken to Renata or Lena since the conference room. My father and I talk occasionally, briefly. He calls on my birthday. I pick up. I don't know what we are to each other anymore, but I know what we used to be, and I know what he let happen, and those two things exist in me at the same time, without resolution. What I do know is this. Nana Ruth handed me a sheet of paper across a kitchen table and told me to put it somewhere safe. She had spent 82 years making sure the numbers always told the truth. She taught me how to follow them. She taught me what they meant. She didn't leave me money. She left me what money actually is. Evidence, when you know how to read it, of what someone actually chose. She chose me. She documented it. She made sure it was witnessed. I don't need anything more than that. But I kept the screenshots anyway. People ask me sometimes if I feel guilty. Not about the money. Nobody asks about the money. They ask about my father. Whether I regret how things ended between us. Whether I think I was too hard on him. I used to turn that question over in my head for a long time before answering. Now I don't. Here's what I actually believe. Having lived this, the consequences that landed on my father were not something I did to him. They were something he built, slowly, over 38 months of asking no questions. Every time a transfer cleared and he didn't wonder where it came from, he made a choice. Not a dramatic choice. Not a villain's choice. Just a quiet, daily decision to let convenience outweigh curiosity. That kind of choice accumulates. It compounds. And eventually, it shows up in a conference room in Richmond with documentation attached. That's not punishment. That's just how cause and effect actually works when you stop looking at it in individual moments and start seeing the full span of what a person did and didn't do. Nana Ruth understood this better than anyone I've ever known. She kept a handwritten list of every dollar she gave my father. She tracked it in her planner the same way she tracked her grocery spending. Not out of suspicion, but out of precision. She believed that a person who pays attention to where things go is a person who retains some control over where they end up. She passed that belief to me across a kitchen table when I was 12 years old, and I don't think she knew then how literally I would one day need to apply it. What I carried out of this experience, the thing that actually stayed with me, is the understanding that intelligence without integrity is just a more sophisticated way of getting lost. Renata was not a stupid woman. She understood legal processes well enough to file a probate challenge. She understood money well enough to route transfers through layers. But she used every bit of that capability in service of taking, and taking is a direction that only ever goes one way. Lena is 29 now. I don't know what her life looks like. What I know is that the $22,000 that passed through her account didn't fix whatever was actually broken. It never does. The thing underneath the money problem was always something the money couldn't reach. And Cassidy, me, the girl who got up at 2 a.m. and built a spreadsheet instead of screaming, I'm not going to tell you I'm at peace with everything. I'm not. I miss who my father used to be, or who I thought he was, which might be the same thing. I miss Nana Ruth every single day. I miss her Scrabble strategy and her Murphy's oil soap, and her complete inability to spend $4 on an avocado. But I am the person she raised me to be. I paid attention. I documented. I followed the numbers all the way back to the truth, and then I let the truth do what truth does when you give it enough room. That's the only thing I know how to tell you. Pay attention. Keep the receipts. Not because you're planning for a fight, but because a person who understands what they have and where it came from and what it actually means is a person that is very, very hard to fool. She told me that when I was 12. She made sure it was true when she was 82. I think about that every time I open a balance sheet.